Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this fourth annual reconciliation lecture of 2015. I am going to just give you an outline of what the program is going to be like this evening, and I will give you the address for the Twitter page and the Facebook page for those of you who are so inclined. So we will have Dr. Liz Lange welcoming everybody. After her, Professor Jonathan Jansen will come up and introduce the lecture and introduce the speaker. And then the speaker will come up and present his address to us for the annual reconciliation lecture. So the last thing I want to share with you are the addresses for the Twitter handle, which is @UFS_trauma_FR, trauma F for flower R. So @UFS_trauma_FR. And the Facebook page address is UFS Trauma Forgiveness Reconciliation Studies. UFS Trauma Forgiveness Reconciliation Studies. You have already started the activity on these social media. We hope that you continue sending the important messages from this conversation tonight. Please turn off your cell phones. Keep them on silent, because you're going to have to have a conversation with the world out there. Please keep them on silent. So before we have the first welcoming speech, we will have the music items by the Odeon School of Music. So please, over to you. Thank you.
I was only lost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was really excellent. Thank you very much. Seems a good idea to start a lecture on reconciliation with music. This was something that Daniel Barenboim and Edward Said did very purposefully in the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Maybe we should organize an orchestra after all, Professor Jansen, of a different kind, I mean. Anyway, good evening to everybody to this fourth reconciliation lecture at the University of the Free State. My duty is very simple. It is to mention a few people. First of all, welcome to our guest of honor and the person who will deliver the lecture, Mr. Colm McKibben. Welcome to the rector of the university, Professor Jansen. To my colleagues in the rectorate of the university, Professor Corley Bitung, a vice rector of research. I believe that Professor Morgan is here too, a vice rector operations. Welcome to Professor Prakash Naidu, campus principal in our Kwakwa campus. To the deans, Professor Neil Heidemann, Natural and Agricultural Sciences, Professor Sechawan Mahomaholo, Faculty of Education, to Professor Caroline Nicholson, Dean of the Faculty of Law, to Professor Lucius Botes from the Faculty of Humanities. Welcome to Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela, who is actually the organizing and driving force behind these lectures, and to Professor Andre Kiet, the head of the Institute for Reconciliation and Social Justice, who reminds us on a daily basis that reconciliation is something that this university is about. Welcome to our president for the SRC, Ms. Mosa Letiane, and all the colleagues from the SRC who are present here. Welcome to the members of the Senate, and to all our colleagues and students who have sort of come to this occasion. These lectures are truly important for all of us, and it is very, very nice to see this house full tonight. So without further ado, let me ask Professor Jansen to initiate the lecture. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody, and to all of you receiving the lecture this evening via the internet, welcome to you as well on our campuses. This is the fourth annual Reconciliation Lecture. The first lecture was delivered in 2012 by the Nobel laureate in literature, Nadine Gordimer. The second by the president of Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia in America, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, that was in 2013. The third lecture last year by the dean of the Harvard Law School, Martha Minow. And tonight, once again, we have a stellar speaker in the form of Colm McKibben, who is the director, South Africa, for the British Council. More about him in a minute. I want to pay special tribute this evening to Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela for her remarkable capacity to draw the best minds in the world and some of the best exemplars of human togetherness to honor the University of the Free State by delivering the Reconciliation Lecture. Why do we do this? It is our belief as a university community that the deep and complex problems of human relationships cannot be resolved through legal and political instruments alone. It certainly cannot be resolved through military force or even majoritarian rule. It requires very different ways of thinking and doing change, whether on a campus or in a country. And one of the most powerful ways of overcoming deep divisions is through the unexpected grace of reconciliation. Such grace is represented so powerfully this evening in the presence of Ms. Candace Mama, who found it in her heart to forgive Eugene de Kock, the man who killed her father, and to make the case, in fact, for his parole. I wonder if Ms. Candace Mama could stand up this evening. There she is. Ah, that could be done. Candace, I would like you to know that the University of the Free State is deeply honored this evening to know you and to learn from you as we continue to build this country from the ashes of colonialism and apartheid. Which brings me to our special guest this evening, our fourth reconciliation lecturer, Mr. Colum McGiven. Now, students, if one day your employer moves you from Northern Ireland to Johannesburg, you could be forgiven for thinking they're trying to get rid of you. Two very troubled parts of the world, and yet this is precisely the caliber of the man we have this evening to address us. Colum McGiven was born and brought up in Northern Ireland at the height of what they call in that part of the world the Troubles. And his early experiences of conflict, sectarianism, and living in a divided society have molded his career and his personal commitment to peace building and to promoting reconciliation. This is one of the hot spots in the world. We could talk, of course, of the Middle East and the Palestinian struggle for justice. We could talk, of course, of the struggles in Turkey, Greece, Syria. We could talk about the American South. We often talk about our own country. But one of the most troubled and divided communities in the world is in Northern Ireland. But not only did he learn to live in that struggle and to survive and to serve, but he was a student leader during the time of the first IRA ceasefires in the 1990s. In other words, we have a person here this evening who not only in his professional life continues to serve divided communities, but also in his personal story carries the wounds of the Troubles with him, and also the lessons learned that he will share with us, some of which he will share with us this evening. But this person is an Energizer bunny, if ever I saw one. He is involved in so many projects, including, I was delighted to find, a project called the UK South Africa Season 2014-2015, which has helped South African artists and art organizations to reach massive audiences in the United Kingdom, and at the same time through his project to bring creative talent from the UK to South Africa to work with their colleagues and their peers in our country. And so from the spoken word to the visual arts, to new writing for theater, music making and design, this is the kind of work that Colum McGiven promotes as the director of British Council, first in Northern Ireland and now here in South Africa. I have to tell you this, students, since I know you're tired of me talking to you about the academic project, but here is a man who actually not only keeps himself busy with so many projects around the world, but is also a very strong academic in his own background. His CV says he has a double first in English language and literature from Queen's University of Belfast, which is one of the top universities in the world, an MSc in organizational management from the same university. And so he brings an academic angle, an interest in the arts, a concern about peacemaking, and this is how he lives his life amongst young people on both sides of the world, trying to get you skilled in negotiation, mediation, and peace. This is what he says about himself. And by the way, I struggled for 2 weeks to find anything on the internet about him, but somebody manages that space for him very, very well. I need that person to help me. He says, I work every day to build trust between people of different cultures and places, and I can trace a direct line from what I do today back to those formative experiences on the streets of Newry and Belfast, where it was clear to me that everyone had a part to play in building peace and a culture of reconciliation. This is what he does, not only for his country, but for ours, and indeed for many others. It gives me great pleasure to invite the 4th annual Reconciliation Lecturer at the University of the Free State to address us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Colm McGibbon.
Thank you very much. Wow. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. Wow, this is amazing. First of all, Vice-Chancellor, Professor Pumla, Student President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Vice-Chancellor and the University for the wonderful hospitality that they've once again shown me here today. And my welcome could not have been more hearty or more warm. I'd also like to thank the Vice-Chancellor right at the very beginning for inviting me to speak this evening, and indeed for Professor Pumla and Joanne for all of their arrangements that they've made this evening. Given the list of people that Professor Jansen gave you about my predecessors as reconciliation lecturers, I have to say that this is at once a humbling and flattering experience. But I'd also like to acknowledge that this is, of course, the first lecture, the first reconciliation lecture since the passing of Nadine Gordimer, who was the first reconciliation lecturer and the first in so many other ways for South Africa. Professor Jansen has described my career and my work as that of a practitioner and a facilitator of others. So it's not usually my space to speak. It's not usually my space to be at the front or talk from the front. That's why the internet is a black spot as far as I am concerned. Rather, I try and find ways for others to do the work and to do the hard work and to have their differences and similarities spoken about and aired. And it's through this process of hearing from people's different voices that things move forward. So what this also means, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have built my career from getting other people to do all the hard work. And in the spirit of being an active practitioner, I would now like to try and get you to do some work for me this evening. Is that possible? Could I ask you all to stand up, please, ladies and gentlemen? That's everybody, whether you're in the Senate and governing body or not. I want everyone standing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, work with me on this one. Stay standing if you think that you have a good sense of humor. I'd just like to note for anyone watching on the internet this evening that 100% of the audience, except for the Vice-Chancellor and Rector, has remained standing this evening. What does this say about our institutional culture? Everyone stand up, please, once again. Stay standing, ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever stolen something from a hotel room. Have you ever stolen something from a hotel room? And again, ladies and gentlemen on the internet, I can confirm that UFS is full of kleptomaniacs. Now, I mean, you can steal anything you can steal from a hotel. Some people like me think the shampoo is there for us to take. And ironically, I'm a great man for a hairnet. I love a good hairnet. Could everyone stand up again for me, ladies and gentlemen? I think we're going to do this for about an hour and a half, Vice-Chancellor, if that's okay. Could I ask you to remain standing if you think that you are above average intelligence for the people in the room? Now, Professor Gobodo Madikizela and her colleagues in psychology will tell us that there are liars in the room, ladies and gentlemen. Correct. Could I ask you all to stand up again, ladies and gentlemen? Could I ask you to remain standing if you think that you are reasonably attractive? And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's about right. Could I ask you all to stand up again, please, ladies and gentlemen? Last one. Stay standing if you think that you are a very forgiving person. Thank you very much for your honesty. And remain standing if you've got a secret that you'd like to share with the rest of the room. It's a very good way of getting people to sit down again. And it's a very good exercise, and one that demonstrates a few things to me. There is a great sense of humour in UFS. And ladies and gentlemen on the internet, we're having great fun here. You should be here too. Next time, make more of an effort. Secondly, there's only certain things in life that people are prepared to admit to in public. And I think that's a truism as well. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, the point of it is that our self-perceptions across a range of issues are sometimes at odds with the reality. And it's an important learning point to make when it comes to first creating the context for peace and then reconciling differences, forgiving evils and facing one's own fears. Many of us believe that in our own hearts we are forgiving. But at what point does that stop? Where would you honestly draw the line? And would there be a difference in your public and your private position? There's three basic themes that I want to cover this evening. First, that it's people who make reconciliation happen. Nothing will get reconciled unless we decide to do it. Secondly, that states and governments have a role in fostering a culture of reconciliation and create the conditions for reconciliation to occur. And the more active that a state is in creating those instruments, often the faster the process of reconciliation. It's important, however, that government-level interventions can happen in a context where others have paved the way, NGOs, civil society, institutions like UFS. Building peace and embedding reconciliation is a forever evolving and developing process. And as we know in South Africa, it's clear when the need for reconciliation started. But when does it stop? That's much harder to tell. And it's clear that the process is not finished here by any means. My final theme this evening is that people's capability to reconcile their own differences, however stark, can be boosted by learning from others in other places, internationally, or perhaps just beyond their own identity group. It's through contact with cultural and experiential difference and otherness and the competing perspectives that can bring that friction and momentum are created, and people can move forward in their own understanding and personal process. So to help flesh out some of these themes, I'm going to use some of my own experiences and examples, particularly from the international work that we do in the British Council, of how learning from other places can bring fresh ideas to stagnant processes. And I'll talk about some stories of reconciliation moments, points in time when reconciliation and its importance is brought from the background to the forefront of our consciousness. And I'll try and show how some of these moments influence reconciliation in ways that only become apparent when we look at them in hindsight or in the rear-view mirror. Lastly, I'll focus on the role of cultural engagement, particularly international cultural engagement, in assisting reconciliation and helping us to do what must be done. I've called this reconciliation lecture this evening, Doing What Must Be Done. And that's an adaptation of a line from a poem called Ceasefire by Michael Longley, a notable and eminent poet from Northern Ireland. And I'll return to the poem later. Now, as Professor Janssen has already told you, I am from Northern Ireland, the northern part of the island of Ireland, which is part of the UK. It's a place of great beauty, wonderful people, and terrible weather. But it's also a place that has been scarred by decades of unrest, killings, bombings and shootings, as Professor Janssen said, known euphemistically and characteristically poetically as the Troubles. The Troubles were a politically driven, religiously aligned conflict that saw Catholics and Protestants, or Unionists and Nationalists, set against each other in the struggle for either the maintenance of the union with the United Kingdom or the unification of the island of Ireland as one political entity. Some would say the Troubles started in the 1960s with a call for civil rights. Some would say they started in the 1950s with the first modern campaign by the IRA. Some point to the partition of Ireland in the 1920s. Some point to the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916 as the point in time when the terrible beauty was born and the country was changed utterly. Many point to the religious and political wars of the 1690s under a Dutch king, ladies and gentlemen. Still others look back to the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 1100s, and I can guarantee you that there is someone in a university somewhere trying to prove that the Northern Irish Troubles can be traced back to the Garden of Eden, ladies and gentlemen, or maybe even the Big Bang. But most accepted opinion gathers around the notion that the recent chapter in Northern Ireland's Troubles began with the peaceful protests of the 1960s, largely, but not exclusively driven by a demand for more rights for Catholics or nationalists, including access to better housing and employment opportunities, and what was known as the Civil Rights Movement. This was a movement that learned from and drew inspiration from what was happening at that time in the US, and of course, from South Africa's struggle against apartheid. Does any of this complexity and heavy historical context sound familiar to you in any way here in South Africa? But of course it must. South Africa's history has tracked along a similar path to that of Northern Ireland, with similar themes emerging at roughly contiguous points. Struggle against a hegemonic power, demands for civil and religious liberties and freedoms, demands for simple civil rights, struggle, a new political settlement, and the pain and liberation that comes from dealing with the past. So I won't try and teach a South African audience anything about conflict, culture, complexity, and its challenges, but I will talk about other people and places where divisions have rocked and altered states, countries, and families, and to tell of some ways in which people have worked together to make things better and to reconcile differences so that they can move on. I'm really honoured to be here in UFS for more than you might realise. I have enormous admiration for what you have achieved together as a university community and how, up to this moment, you continue to grapple with the issues of equity, diversity, and parity of esteem. I have enormous respect for the work that the Vice-Chancellor has led, and I've been equally impressed with the student leadership here. I've spent some time with them over the last occasions that I've been here, listening to their techniques and their tactics. And I'm also really interested in the parallels between their experience and mine. So the first thing that I want to do this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is to praise the student movement. In Northern Ireland today, it is still possible for young people to grow up in single identity communities of Catholics or Protestants, Unionist families or nationalists. And that's largely because since the peace deal that caught the world's attention in 1997, the Good Friday Agreement, Northern Ireland has in some ways seemed to have got better and better at keeping people apart. And that's almost as if the key to peace was to keep them apart, keep them away from each other. Of course, that's not right in the long run. And it's also why I wince when I see what's happened here recently at the school in Rudaport or Curl or other institutions. In Northern Ireland, children are still schooled either in Catholic schools or state, largely Protestant schools, with only a small but growing integrated education movement catering for 8% of our young people. And what that means is that it's entirely possible for a young person to pass through their school days today and not meet someone from another religion. The first time that some young people can encounter someone from another community is at college or at university. And in the past, that has placed a very heavy responsibility on those institutions to either engage with that and deal with that phenomenon or suffer the consequences, particularly in the years at the height of the Troubles, but still up until today. So I admire enormously how the student leadership here at UFS is engaged with the institutional leadership in the process of change and adaptation that's required to make this university all that it can be. As Professor Jansen has said, I was a student leader in the mid-1990s at the Queen's University of Belfast at a time when that institution was grappling with traditions that were perceived by some to be sectarian and prejudiced in favour of one particular side in the Northern Ireland conflict. And what was clear was the institution needed to change, to deal with and grip discriminatory traditions and institutional behaviours. And this included the use of contentious and politically loaded symbols, traditions that seemed to favour one side and demean the other, and setting right a very bad historical imbalance in employment. In those days, fewer Catholics were employed by the university, and many of them in lower paid and non-academic jobs. But all of that has changed. The Queen's University of Belfast is a world-leading university in its own right, a member of the Russell Group, the elite group of UK universities. And it's widely regarded internationally nowadays for the quality of its teaching, of its learning, and of course, of its graduates. Every student enrolled in Queen's knows that the scroll that they get from the Chancellor at graduation is worth much more than the paper that it's written on, that it's from a world-class and respected institution, proving that it's in everyone's interests to support the institution to grow and change, everyone's interests. In the Queen's University of Belfast, it was strong, courageous leadership from the Vice-Chancellor across the university, as well as a highly political and highly engaged student body that created the changes, which were, of course, sometimes painful, really painful. And the cornerstone of it all was this idea of a neutral working environment. It's an awful phrase, isn't it? A neutral working environment. An awful phrase, but very powerful in its realization. It was about creating a place of study and learning and work that was representative of its place, but neutral in relation to its symbols and traditions. One that stood for equality of opportunity for all and instituted fair employment practices that were ahead of their time. A neutral working environment. It's an awful phrase, but it gave us just what we needed. It was an institutional vocabulary to describe the change that we wanted to see. So, young people meeting those from the other side for possibly the first time in Northern Ireland was a major opportunity, and one spotted by the student movement as a way of engaging activists in positive, constructive engagement that moved issues forward. And credit has to be paid to national bodies like the National Union of Students in the UK Students' Union, and the Union of Students in Ireland, the Irish Students' Union, who, at the height of the conflict, crafted an agreement that students in Northern Ireland would not be forced to choose an allegiance between one union or the other. They could be members of both unions simultaneously. And this was years ahead of its time in British-Irish cooperation, and still stands today as one of the most visible and concrete manifestations of dealing with difference and building a reconciliation culture. So, let's hear it for the student movement. And while the student movement sometimes gets the headlines for all the wrong reasons, and I think that everyone in the room here this evening would agree that supergluing one's hands to the Vice-Chancellor's car is a bad idea and it's wrong and one shouldn't do it, I can show you many instances where the student movement has been brave and talked through unspeakable issues, has worked quietly through successive leaderships to make a real difference over the long term and play a major role in creating a culture of peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland and in other countries. For Northern Ireland, the cameras, the arc lights, the press packs, they've all moved on to other places. And that's because peace has lasted. Peace pertains. Thank goodness. But like in South Africa, it's just too simple to say that it's job done. That would be naive. In Northern Ireland, there continue to be challenges to the peace, in some ways because the issue of the past has not been dealt with fully. I think that peace and reconciliation are mutually dependent. You can't maintain one over the long run without attending to the other. Sometimes reconciliation needs a focal point for people to clearly see its power. Sometimes reconciliation needs an inspirational figure. Sometimes those figures are obvious. Sometimes they emerge quietly and unexpectedly. Madiba was extraordinary. The Arch is too. I look to them for inspiration, and I think back to what happened immediately after an explosion in a Northern Irish border town called Enniskillen on the 8th of November, 1987. And I think back to a man that you have probably never heard of called Gordon Wilson. In Gordon Wilson's own account of that day, he tells of being pushed forward by the explosion and being in the darkness of the rubble. He felt his daughter Mary reach and take his hand in the darkness and ask him, "Are you okay, Daddy?" "Yes," he said. "My arm's a bit sore, but I'm okay. What about you, dear?" "I'm fine," she said, and then she screamed. He asked her how she was 4 or 5 times, and each time she said she was fine, but she screamed, and he could not understand how this could be. She held his hand tightly and said to him, "I love you, Daddy." And those were the last words that she spoke. Mary Wilson, a 20-year-old nurse, was one of 11 who died in the Enniskillen bombing that day, 8th of November, 1987. 63 were injured, and many have never recovered from their wounds. A matter of hours later, in a TV interview that shook lives across Northern Ireland and the world, Gordon Wilson spoke about those who killed his daughter. He said he bore them no ill will at all whatsoever, and that he hoped that he had the grace to continue to do so. This was one of the most poignant and affecting moments of the Troubles, and a turning point. As families gathered round the evening news and watched the replayed pictures of the blast site, the rescue operation, the rubble, in the little town that everyone knew, Gordon Wilson's superior strength of forgiveness rocked the country more than any bomb explosion could have. He said his daughter was a great wee lassie. She loved her profession. She was a pet, and she's dead. And he bore no ill will to those who killed her. I remember seeing this interview on the evening news with my parents, almost too young to comprehend the gasps in our house at what he said. I remember a discussion about what we would have done if we'd been faced with this circumstance in the immediate hours after this atrocity. And I remember my father shaking his head and saying, "That man gives us all hope." Wilson committed the rest of his life to the pursuit of peace, and he worked at community level with the youth in Northern Ireland and internationally. He wrote a book, Mary, and he continued to do bold things. After another IRA bomb in 1993 killed 2 young boys in Warrington in England, Wilson again courted controversy, and he met with the IRA to make a personal plea for peace. The IRA was the Irish Republican Army. But he reported, sadly, they listened, but they made no change in their position. Perhaps it was naive of me to imagine that because it was me that they would. I went in innocence to search for what my heart told me would be a way forward. I got nothing. But I think he had got something. His immediate response to the murder of his daughter followed through with a life dedicated to subtly, quietly, and only sometimes publicly pursuing peace so that this might not happen to another family, any other daughter. He did what he thought must be done. In 1997, 10 years after the bomb, and sadly 2 years after Gordon Wilson's death, Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams apologised for the Enniskillen bombing. Gordon Wilson did give us hope, and he taught us that we can do what must be done. He played an enormous part in first capturing attention for the power of reconciliation, its liberating force, its potency in one's personal life. But he also worked steadily to contribute to the peace-building movement and to the reconciliation culture that created the conditions for change in Northern Ireland. He did live to see the first IRA ceasefire, called in 1994, not long after that day that he had met with the IRA leadership and thought that he had got nothing. Doing what must be done. Doing what must be done is an adaptation of a line from a poem, Ceasefire, by Northern Irish poet Michael Longley. It was first published in the Irish Times newspaper 3 days after the first IRA ceasefire in 1994. Not with foresight, or I don't think with any coincidence, but just, I think, through the poet's prescience and growing sense that things were changing where that poet was from. That there was a desperate hunger for peace and for reconciliation, whatever that meant. Beautifully, the poem doesn't refer to Northern Ireland, to the Northern Ireland situation or to the Troubles, although at that very moment the title of the poem, Ceasefire, was arresting, as you might imagine. It's a sonnet. It summarizes a famous episode in Book 24 of Homer's Iliad. Now, as you know, Homer's Iliad is not about Northern Ireland, but it's about the 10-year war between the Greeks and the Trojans, during which the city of Troy, under the elderly King Priam, is besieged by the Greek armies under their commander, the youthful Achilles. Achilles eventually kills the king's son, Hector, and drags his body around the walls of Troy. And King Priam goes to Achilles, as this poem recounts, to beg for his son's body. Achilles, moved to pity, calls a truce so that Hector can be buried by his father. And the Iliad concludes with that ceasefire. To do what must be done, however painful, is the central theme of the poem. May I read it to you? It's a sonnet. It's 14 lines. Okay. Ceasefire by Michael Longley. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed and, for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present, home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles, built like a god, Priam, good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. He nailed it there, didn't he? He really nailed it. I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. He nailed it. Professor Edna Longley is the poet Michael Longley's wife. Professor Edna Longley taught me at the Queen's University in Belfast, and I think she would be absolutely devastated that I've just used the phrase nailed it in relation to that poem. But I have, and in public. It's an amazing poem, an amazing piece of art. And Longley's poem is important on a range of levels because it was so aptly timed that it's become as well known for its timing as for its beauty, poignancy, and craft. It became an artistic touchstone for the moment that we all had wanted and prefigured beautifully the hard work that lay ahead as ceasefires collapsed, were reinstated, became peace processes. The peace process required the release of prisoners, destruction of weapons, creation of political structures, and while not everyone did, more and more people found themselves doing what must be done. The path forward from the first IRA ceasefire that Longley's poem captured in 1994 was not a smooth one. And indeed, the last 20 years in Northern Ireland has seen the place changed utterly, in places unrecognisably for the better, but it was painful. The 15th of August, 1998, was just another day. It was a Saturday morning with shoppers and tourists going about their business, getting clothes for school, groceries for home, maybe a dress for going out that night. At that time, the Provisional IRA and the Loyalist paramilitary groups were on a ceasefire. A process of political dialogue was underway, and in the April of that year, the Good Friday Agreement had been signed after multi-party talks chaired by the US Senator George Mitchell. That agreement was truly historic, and the core of its recommendations are unchanged today. In fact, Northern Ireland's present devolved system of government is based on that agreement and the principle of consent, meaning that for as long as the majority of people in Northern Ireland wished it, it would remain part of the United Kingdom. Sacrifices. The Republic of Ireland would give up a sovereignty claim on the northern part of the island. The IRA and other groups would give up their weapons and have them destroyed in a process called decommissioning, which was overseen by Cyril Ramaphosa, our own Cyril Ramaphosa. The UK government would release prisoners from the hated prisons, the H-blocks. It created institutions, systems and structures that even 5 years previously, ladies and gentlemen, would have seemed absolutely impossible to conceive of, and indeed had failed miserably at a previous attempt to implement them 30 years before. Issues related to civil rights, decommissioning of weapons, justice and policing were all central to that agreement, but crucially, there was no provision in that agreement for dealing with the past. So the agreement was to be put to the vote on 22nd of May 1998. Oh, that was a heady time, full of possibility. The attention of the world was shone on the impossible deal that Northern Ireland's politicians were making. Northern Ireland's politicians were global in their standing, South African in their courage and vision. Bono was involved, everyone. Bono got involved in our peace process. Of course, we had seen what was happening in South Africa, and we drew great inspiration from that. Support for the agreement was overwhelming in both parts of the island. Some people knew it was the right thing to do. Some saw a future for their children without bombs and bullets and the sectarian hatred, and an end to a way of life that kept people at home in the long, dark nights, frightened to stray in their own town or city. Others had to swallow hard and get down on their knees and do what must be done. Voting yes in that referendum for some was a choking experience, but one that they knew was for the best. And for reconciliation to really take place, people had to feel able to compromise without feeling compromised. And that's what made the 15th of August 1998 all the more sickening. A splinter group of the Provisional IRA, calling themselves the real IRA, they were opposed to the ceasefires and to the Good Friday Agreement. They drove a red Vauxhall Cavalier car into the busy market town of Omagh and parked it next to the shops on Main Street, some distance from their claimed target, which was the town's courthouse. Some garbled warnings of a planted bomb were phoned to a local radio station, so inaccurate that the police began to funnel people towards the car and on Main Street. The car was packed with 230 kilograms of fertilizer-based explosives. At 3:10 that afternoon, it was detonated, killing 29 people, injuring over 200, and shattering the peace. And as you know, in South Africa, a car bomb is brutal, indiscriminate. The people who died that day were from many different backgrounds: Protestants, Catholics, a Mormon teenager, 5 other teenagers, 6 children, a woman pregnant with twins, 2 Spanish tourists, other tourists on a day trip from the Republic of Ireland. This was the worst single atrocity in the 40 years of the Troubles, And it came weeks after the single greatest peace-building achievement in the island's history. That juxtaposition, that contradiction was horrific, yet unifying. It was the deadliest bombing ever in Northern Ireland, but it created a resolve in the people that propelled the cause of peace. In a situation as backward-looking as this, the only thing that can be done is to move forward, because the future has to be better than this most horrific present. Of course, it made the sight of prisoners emerging from jail in the months ahead much, much harder for some to take. Once again, time for kissing Achilles' hand. Where Gordon Wilson gave us hope, and Michael Longley gave us inspiration, the Omagh bomb reminded us that the future is full of challenges for us all. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed. I like it. I like that a quirk of circumstance and timing has brought great beauty and art like this piece from Longley to a much wider audience, with a message and exhortation that gives people a framework to understand what reconciliation can mean, and to show how it has a resonance and applicability in a classical context. By drawing on classical references, yet making it so easy for the readers to see themselves in his verse, Longley lifts the thinking about our own differences and transports them to Troy. And he shows us in 14 lines that millions of other people in other places and throughout history have faced their own similar need to get to grips and face their own terrible problems. Is it that Northern Ireland suffers from a collective narcissism of minor differences? What can be learned from the ways in which other people have dealt with such issues in other places? And it's in this precise area of international engagement and learning from other places that the voluntary sector, the churches, our major educational institutions all played a vital role in ventilating the thinking at a time when arguments were trapped. I know from personal experience that in the darkest days of the Troubles, it seemed that the only visitors coming to Northern Ireland from far-flung countries were intrepid students on exchange, crazy, reckless students from far-flung places like France or Germany or China. The British Council facilitated many such exchanges. In a Northern Ireland context, it was language assistants coming from Europe to teach in our schools, or university students on exchange for technical experience. In South Africa, during apartheid, we didn't just have the libraries open to anyone, regardless of colour, and used as places of discussion or to meet, but we had the Bruff Scholarship Programme. Uniformly, bright young things spending some time in another country and learning from it, and simultaneously shaping its people. That's a very powerful action, a really powerful action, international cultural contact, and it's the business of the British Council. The British Council is the UK's international organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities, and our purpose is simple. It's to connect people from the UK and other countries, and therefore foster mutual understanding, build trust between people, and open doors through academic advancement and cultural exchange. We're on the ground in 6 continents, over 100 countries, bringing international collaboration to life between people every day. 2014 not only marked 20 years of democracy in South Africa, but also 80 years of the British Council, 55 years of the British Council in South Africa. Our first office opened in 1959. And our work in South Africa reaches all provinces, spans the areas of language, education, sport, as well as in arts and culture. It's about updating our perceptions of our respective cultures. It's rekindling old connections and establishing new collaborations between young leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, learners and educators in South Africa and in the UK. I enjoyed every minute of the celebration of 20 years of the Rainbow Nation last year, and it allowed us as an organisation to reflect on how broad and deep-rooted our relationship of collaboration and exchange has become. As Professor Jansen has said, the UK-South Africa Arts Season 2014-2015, in partnership with the South African Department of Arts and Culture, is the largest single programme of people-to-people cultural activity ever staged between our countries, with hundreds of artists and institutions creating and working in both countries. And tomorrow morning, with the Arts Minister in Joburg, we'll be announcing 40 new collaborations across all art forms between South Africa and the UK, totaling millions of rand in support of arts and cultural activity between our two countries. We also work in partnership with the Department of Basic Education here to help them establish English as a first and additional language in all 28,000 government schools. And our partnership means, that we're reaching all 400,000 teachers to improve education outcomes for the country's 12 million pupils. Through a piece of work called Premier Skills, we work with the community organisations and South African Football Association to provide coaching and classroom skills for leaders in football from across South Africa through one of the UK's top-class brands, the Premier League. Tell me, which one of you in this room does not support a UK Premiership football club? We host international discussions on issues of central importance to South Africa's future, and this includes major international conferences on language and development and the research we conducted onto the value of creative industries. This year, we will host the Arts and Culture Trust Conference in Joburg, and in 2016, we will welcome over 1,000 international higher education leaders to Cape Town for our Going Global conference, the first time that it will have been held in Africa. South Africa is immensely important to the British Council. At the heart of what we do is sharing the UK's great cultural assets, the English language, arts and education with the world. And the reason that we do this, and the reason why I'm giving you the detail on this, is because we do this not just to encourage people to visit, study in, do business with, or get to know the UK, although this is a good set of reasons in their own right. We do it because we believe that effective international cultural relations works on a much deeper and more profound level. It builds trust in the institutions and people of the UK, and that's good for us over the long run. Trust is an intuitive precondition for reconciliation in most instances, isn't it? You don't have to like someone to get a peace deal or a compromise or negotiate a resolution or get your needs satisfied. You don't have to like them, but you do have to trust them. And in negotiation parlance, we call that confidence-building processes used to develop trust. Trust is central to our thinking about our work, and we've researched it quite extensively. Our research shows that those who have had an involvement in cultural contact with the UK through arts, education, English language activities, those people have a greater trust in people from the UK. A higher level of trust in people from the UK is associated with a higher level of interest in doing business and trading with the UK. The greater the extent of cultural contact, the deeper the trust. The higher the level of trust, the more interest people have in doing more with and knowing more about the UK, studying there, visiting as a tourist, learning more about its arts or its institutions and culture. Trust is a serious international business. As an organisation that has thought deeply about trust and understands its importance to peace building and reconciliation, we have, of course, been directly involved in activities interrogating issues relating to conflict and long-term peace building over our 80-year history. And we've done this in some really challenging places, like Lebanon, where we produced Fighting for Peace, a campaign documentary to promote peace and community cohesion. The film dealt straight on with the risk of slipping into civil war again, and used the experiences of former fighters to make the case for peace. Also in Lebanon, this time with Jordan, we used forum theatre techniques with women in displaced or unstable communities to encourage self-expression and empowerment as part of a wider leadership training programme. Forum theatre, as I'm sure you will know, is a well-known tool, a tool often used in restorative justice contexts. And it's unlike traditional drama. Forum theatre is a short play that typically ends in a tragedy. It's performed before an audience that can relate to the tragedy. The play is then performed again, but this time the audience is allowed to stop and interact with the performance and intervene and change events so that a solution can be found. And we've used this to enormous effect across the world, including in places like post-tsunami Sri Lanka, in deeply divided, war-torn communities, to try and open up discussions about the differences that people are facing. In South Africa this year, just now, we've worked with the London's Royal Court Theatre, 12 new young South African and Zimbabwean playwrights, to help them bring to the stage their new writing. Early readings of this work shows a body of work that's incredibly diverse and strong, and not necessarily focused on the themes that you might think that it focuses on. The voices speak about contemporary issues in a fresh way: sexuality, economic empowerment, the legacy of the past, masculinity, what it means to be without work in a township. Theatre here has a proud history of facing up to contemporary challenges, and we are pleased to be able to play our part in bringing the next wave of new playwrights to your attention. If you're interested, you can hear these young South African voices on a BBC Radio 4 programme called Writing a New South Africa, the last edition of which was broadcast today. If you go to the BBC iPlayer online, you can listen again. And I strongly encourage you to do so. You will hear some of the freshest, most imaginative, compelling voices, new talent from South Africa. But back in Northern Ireland today, a Catholic and a Protestant girl swap school uniforms in a fine short film produced as part of a project to teach children about the Troubles or war or conflict. In a pivotal and poignant scene early on, the two 17-year-old girls from either side of the divided city of Derry or Londonderry, they switch their school uniforms and see themselves in the mirror for the first time. Now, girls of that age do that all the time, don't they? Swap clothes, see what looks best, mix and match. But this gesture is loaded. Simple, but at the same time, totally subversive. Courtney Cook is from Lisneal College in the loyalist Protestant Waterside on the east bank of the River Foyle. Yvonne Weir goes to the Catholic St. Cecilia's College, only a couple of miles away as the crow flies, but across the river in Cregan, the fortress estate of Republican Bogside. Once the IRA controlled Free Derry. The swap was the schoolgirls' own idea for a film called In Peace Apart, in which, having changed uniforms, they walk through the city and demonstrate how their lives up to that point have been almost entirely segregated. In a small city, they have never set eyes on each other's schools, barely crossed the River Foyle to the other side, the river forming a natural and psychological boundary. It's a great piece of work. It's only 6 minutes on YouTube. Very imaginative, evocative, simple, to-the-point storytelling. In Peace Apart. I recommend that you Google it. It exposes the weakness at the heart of a deeply divided society, that boys and girls, men and women, have much more in common than often divides them, and they're curious about each other for all the right reasons. This film forms part of a project that has produced some of the most imaginative and creative peace-building work of recent times in a physically divided city. Teaching divided histories, was the idea of a brilliant set of people in an arts and multimedia hub called the Nerve Centre, which joined up with the British Council to mount this challenging international project during Derry's year as the UK City of Culture in 2013. The aim of Teaching Divided Histories is to transfer knowledge and expertise between Northern Ireland and other conflict-affected societies on how the delivery of education and learning can be developed to promote shared societies. Harnessing the potential of moving image and digital media, Teaching Divided Histories brings together post-primary teachers from across the world to draw on best practice in the international field of conflict education through the networks of the British Council. And the project is giving teachers the confidence, skills, and specific resources, importantly, to support and enable them to explore contentious issues of history and identity in the classroom. The international dimension to this project is absolutely key, with lessons being drawn from activities in Sierra Leone, India, Lebanon, and of course, South Africa. And what the facilitators in the Nerve Centre observed is highly instructive in its own right, that sometimes it's easier to start by teaching conflict that's distant geographically and in time before getting on to our own. I admire the Teaching Divided Histories project for its robustness, its commitment to searching for lessons in other contexts, but mostly for its relevance to Northern Ireland today. Dealing with the past is still a preoccupation today, an unsolved problem. In December just past, the day before Christmas, a new political deal was brokered in Northern Ireland by the British and Irish governments. It didn't get much attention internationally, and that's because Northern Ireland's leaders have reached the difficult phase of deep but important negotiation. The agreement that they made is one that shows very clearly how dealing with the past is inextricably linked to moving to the future. Alongside a complex economic stimulus package designed to lessen Northern Ireland's reliance on UK government subsidy, there was a sizable amount of effort devoted to dealing with the legacy of the Troubles for the first time. A number of new agencies are to be created. A historical investigations unit will examine unsolved murders carried out during the Troubles, while the Independent Commission on Information Retrieval will provide an avenue for families to learn more about the fate of their loved ones. Perpetrators or others with knowledge of killings during the Troubles will, if a family gives permission, be able to give the Commission information on the basis of limited immunity from prosecution. Now, you will recognise this process from South Africa. But there's a big contrast between the reconciliation process here in South Africa, where the TRC got to work relatively soon after the new arrangements, and in Northern Ireland, where it's taken 20 years for official provision to be made for some process of engaging with the past. And we have to acknowledge that in Northern Ireland, and perhaps here, it's still very raw for many victims of the conflict. I think it's good, and it goes without saying it's good, that Northern Ireland is at last engaging with these issues through official channels. And it's interesting to read South African commentators' views on how the culture of reconciliation here is slipping. Archbishop Tutu has called for a resuscitation of the national spirit of magnanimity and common purpose. Fanny du Toit from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation points to a lack of political will, but one can still see remarkable moments of reconciliation here, personified here tonight by Candice Mama, daughter of Eugene de Kock's victim, and how she has engaged with him over the years and supported his parole. And we applauded her rightly earlier on this evening, ladies and gentlemen, for doing what must be done. I think the Darby Lewis case illustrates how the absence of reconciliation and a process can affect things. International links have played their part. Over the course of the Troubles and the recent period of peace building, international cultural relations has been influential, directly and obliquely, in building trust between people and providing fresh thinking and new perspectives on old arguments. Arts and cultural exchange can sometimes simply offer up different ways of seeing, different ways of imagining. It can demonstrate that others grapple with frighteningly similar issues and prove, more often than not, that we have more in common with each other than things dividing us. Crucially, education and culture builds trust, even when the issues seem intractable. I've been in the room with young people from Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan when conventional accepted conflicts and tribalisms have disappeared, in part through facilitation, but also through what happens in the break time when the iPhones come out and the earphones get shared. In conclusion, your two favorite words this evening, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion. Only 14 more pages to go. In conclusion, we all have our own part to play in creating a culture of reconciliation. It's best when governments are engaged and provide a superstructure. NGOs, our universities, voluntary organizations, youth organizations all have a responsibility and a role. And lessons from other places can be powerful and instructive. Hope, inspiration, and commitment to reconciliation can come from unlikely places. And we need figures we can respect and stories we can return to when things get hard and our sadness fills the building. Last year was the 80th anniversary of the British Council, and we produced a publication, 80 Moments That Shaped the World. South Africa appears in that publication 4 times. 4 moments that shaped the world, as decided by an international panel. Madiba's release from prison and all that that signified. South Africa and the Rugby World Cup in 1996. Yes. The discovery of the remains of our earliest ancestors at the cradle of humankind several years ago, and right at the front of the book, a foreword offered very kindly by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which is beautifully resonant for tonight. And I'll read you a short piece, if I may. His words, not mine. As I have written elsewhere, a human life is a great mixture of goodness, beauty, cruelty, heartbreak, indifference, love, and so much more. All of us share the core qualities of our human nature, and so sometimes we are generous, sometimes selfish. Sometimes we are thoughtful, and other times thoughtless. Sometimes we are kind, sometimes cruel. But democracy gave hope to South Africa and sent a message to the world that men and women working together can reshape the world they live in peacefully and with forgiveness. Cultural and educational organizations like the British Council are at their very best when they stay open and reach out to make connections in places of conflict, turbulence, and discord. It can be difficult, but it is right that the British Council is for engagement and against isolation. No act is unforgivable. No person or country is beyond redemption, and the world needs more people to reach out to one another. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor, for affording me this honour to address you tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sitting on my frock.
It is a long frock. Thank you very, very much for allowing us to sit at your feet and to listen to the richness of what you had offered us this evening.
Thank you.
The images that you paint, the stories that you have told about reconciliation and the importance of doing what must be done. And I wonder, this line from Ceasefire, the poem, in a way captures the idea that there's something about the necessity of the arts or a spirit of creativity in being able to reconcile with another. It's a kind of an imaginative, moral imagination or imagination coming into play in just the capacity for people to reconcile. I wonder if you could share with us just your experiences at school. What moved you about this line and what moved you into action? You spoke earlier on about how the poets moved you and gave you language. I thought that was so important, the idea of being given language to move forward. Could you share with us the moment of just being moved collectively as a student body who wanted change in your country?
Yes, I mean, it's not very often as a 21-year-old young man or whatever age I was that, I was a student leader and someone bursts into your office in the Students' Union and says, "You've got to see this poem." That doesn't happen very often, It's normally other things they're bursting in to tell you about. But when someone does that, and I was honored to have been taught by Edna Longley. Michael Longley read this poem for us in our meetings. It's beautiful and powerful, but it's also the timing of something like that. I mean, how did that poet know what was about to happen? He didn't, but he knew at the same time. A prescience, a poetic genius. Look, it was something that I return to continually at moments when I think about how difficult something can be, and when you have to try and do something that's unpalatable, but it is the right thing to do. And it just gives you an architecture or an artistic framework. And you could talk about so many other things in the arts and culture here in South Africa. You look at what the theatres have done here, look at your writers, your poets. You will know better than me. You look about their commitment to storytelling in this country during the tough times, from this country during the good times, about this country during the challenging times. And we cannot underestimate the power of the arts to give us a mental way of seeing and understanding and comprehending difference, challenges, and new approaches. And governments shouldn't underestimate the power of the arts to speak to people in large scale, and they shouldn't underfund them either.
Thank you, Colm. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to have a conversation with Colm, Mr. McGiven, whatever is on your heart. And he's very open. He has told me that there are no questions that are out of bounds. So we invite you at this point, please, anyone who wants to start. There's a hand over there. Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Dinto Saramula. I am the president of Golden Key International Honor Society, UFS chapter. And I have one question that I would like to ask you, sir. And this question being the definition of reconciliation. I was in a meeting, I think it was yesterday, with Dr. Chris Beam, and she asked me a question: what is reconciliation? How would you define reconciliation? And I saw that people have different views on what reconciliation is. So I would like you to please explain to us, if you allow, what reconciliation is according to you, sir. And that would be my first question. And the second question would be, what would you say are the effective tools that you can use to realize this reconciled state that we're all looking for? And that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinto.
Do you want to take a few, and then that gives me somewhere to hide if there's a difficult question?
Okay, as you wish. Anyone who would like to ask a second question? In the front here. Yes, please.
Thanks. My name is Shakut Trevor and I'm a student at the University of the Free State. My question is to Prof. Do you think that we can ever build an everlasting reconciliation and a peaceful culture, or a sustainable reconciliation and a peaceful culture, if we don't deal with the question of men's relation to production? And I'm asking this question precisely because if we check back into our history, all the waves and episodes of uprisings which often leads to these atrocities being committed is because of people rising to obtain a better life. So my question is asked to you, do you think we can ever build a sustainable reconciliation and an ever peaceful culture, everlasting peaceful culture, if we don't deal with the question of men's relation to production? Thanks.
That one was
Could
for
you
you,
please-
wasn't it? That was the hard one. What-
Everyone who wears a red robe is referred to as prof at this university.
I understand. Well, thank you very much for the promotion. And I'll collect the scroll from the Vice Chancellor later. Professor. Look, what is reconciliation? Reconciliation must be a deeply personal thing. I don't think someone can tell you that you must reconcile. In the same way as I don't think anyone can command you to love them, respect them. I think it has to be something that's endogenous, from within, you know? But sometimes you need reconciliation monkey bars to help you climb up there and understand what it is. Things like a poem, or things like your father crying about another man's forgiveness. Things like the magnanimity of a figure you respect. Look to Madiba. You know, I think we all need an architecture of reconciliation that helps us climb to the summit of the building in order to do what must be done. And I have several things in my heart which help me do that. But, you know, you must have your own. And I can't tell you what they are, nor can I tell you to reconcile. What are the instruments of reconciliation? Everyone has their part to play. Again, I don't think someone should believe that reconciliation is someone else's responsibility. I'll get on with my job here and let them worry about reconciliation. I think everyone has a part to play. And, you know, peace in my country would not have been created without the strength of the women's movement, the student movement, the voluntary sector, politicians, civil society, the institutions like the universities. You know, everyone has their part to play, and everyone should be a contributor to it in some way. And that's why I deeply admire what you do here at UFS, because you live it every day, and you grapple with those issues in a very brave fashion, and I admire you for it. And, you know, a little bit of feedback from me to you is keep going, keep that process going.
There was a question. Let's skip that question.
I think that's known as a flutter of applause there, Puma. A flutter. Let's aim for a Mexican wave next time.
Thank you, Prof. Brumla. Good evening, Mr. McGibbon. My name is Mosa. I have one question, and it basically is in the context of our country. I have one fear, about this country and perhaps the rest of the world, that are we not too quick to reconcile? You look back at this country, and perhaps even after every conflict that takes place, and the first step right after the conflict is reconcile. Is there a possibility that there might perhaps be a step before you reconcile? Is there a process before we reconcile? Because every time we go back to things, it's almost as though something is missing right in between the conflict and the reconciliation stage. So, are we missing something between conflict and reconciliation?
Thank you. Another question from the floor. There's a hand right there at the back, if you see that person with the hand at the back. So far, the questions have been very clear, very succinct, so let's keep that spirit up.
Thank you, Prof. Pumla. My name is Piwe Mate. The question that I have for Mr. McGivern is that, in your view, has South Africa's reconciliation process, or is it complete? And I'm going to make one example just to give you more clarity around this. Let's say I have a friend of mine, or between you and I, you borrow my bicycle, I give you the bicycle, and then somehow the bicycle gets damaged. And then you come back to me and you say that you would like me to forgive you for what you've done for breaking the bicycle. And I will forgive you spiritually, but materially, the bicycle is still broken and it has not been retrieved to its previous state, and I've lost something. So there's an argument relating specifically to South Africa's process that it's been incomplete because it's only addressed the spiritual aspect and not the material aspect, because too many have lost in the process of the struggle, but then the reconciliation process did not include other aspects materially, such as reparations and so forth. Now, is there also an example of how these aspects were addressed in the situation with the Irish process of reconciliation as well?
Those are the two questions for now.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the student leadership of the organization for providing me with such hard questions. So thank you. I thought I'd flattered you from the stage and that would avoid that. I wouldn't expect anything else, actually. Musa, your question. South Africa should not underestimate the inspiration that it provided for the rest of the world in the way in which you conducted yourself at that time in your history. And how that action, how that series of things that you did, that you managed here, inspired the rest of the world and showed us a way that an impossible conundrum could be solved. And you should be proud of that. Is there a gap between conflict and reconciliation? Seamus Heaney, another famous Irish poet, Nobel laureate, has a line in one of his poems from Station Island, and it's for 3 words: hiatus, habits after life. You know, if you pause and don't do what must be done, then you run the risk of that space, that hiatus, being filled by all the negativity and problems once again, and being overwhelmed by your issues and not dealing with the future. So I think, I think South Africa is an inspiration to the world. At that time, provided leadership for people who were searching for ways of doing what must be done. I think it's an apocryphal story about politicians from Northern Ireland, just at the time when South Africa was transforming. And they wanted to come here to see and understand and find out from on the ground what was happening. But they wouldn't get onto the same plane and fly together here. So they had to take 2 separate planes to fly to OR Tambo, a Catholic plane and a Protestant plane. And unfortunately, they flew back on 2 separate planes. But they had seen and drawn inspiration from what was going on here. Piwa's question. You know, to rebuild your bicycle, you need an engineer, you need a cyclist, you need a chain person, you need somebody who's going to pump up the tires. You know, you need to invest in the skills that you need to fix what's broken. And that's all I'll say about that, because I can't pontificate to South Africa. But what I do see here is a real need for us all to engage with education and training and investment in people and trying to build the skills for the modern economy. And I think that there are too few people in this country and too few people in the world who possess the skills that they need to cope in a modern knowledge economy. And I think that's something we've got to work on.
So in a way, in answer to Piwa's question, you're saying the doing what must be done has to take place, but in addition to that, there's another process that needs to take place, focus on the education and building the skills of people as a way of dealing with the past. That's what the message you're conveying to us this evening.
Yes, I think so. And I draw my evidence from the commentators in the press. Last weekend, Sunday Independent had a race relations special. Almost every commentator on that double-page spread said, there's an issue here that we still need to attend to. This problem has not gone away. You know, we need to attend to this issue in this country. And I think that that's right. I think, you know, as I said in my lecture, Archbishop Tutu has commented on that. You know, he's like a resuscitation of the ability of dealing with these issues. So I think that that's right, because I think that building peace is a constant process. One must continually attend to it, or else we run the risk of old furies re-emerging once again.
Thank you. The hands, just the third row here.
There's somebody drowning at the back there, or it's a double hand wave. So.
Where is the mic? There are hands at the back. Hard to see. Could you stand up, please? Okay, yeah, thank you.
All right. Good evening, sir. My question is, when in the process of approaching reconciliation, don't you think that in the context of South Africa, as we continue to engage international speakers, particularly the ones from the Western countries, don't you think the more we kind of like continue to engage reconciliation from an academic point of view, and at the same time we are kind of like isolating the real individuals given the context of South Africa and the political landscape? My question is, do you think that are we actually, how can I phrase it? Are we doing justice given the context of South African politics when we approach the issue of reconciliation, if we continue to isolate the real stalwarts of South African struggle, especially when we are approaching the issue of reconciliation? Because personally, I feel we've been engaging, or we've been liaising, or we've been roping in the Western figures to come and address South African issues while sidelining the real instigators of reconciliation in South Africa in a form of Jacob Zuma's, apart from the Kandla issues and etc. I mean, we have to be cognizant and be honest enough to say that he was part and parcel of a group of individuals who kind of approached the issue of reconciliation cordially, respectfully, intellectually, and with the knowledge and the background of South Africa in mind? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Part of the challenge with your question, I'm not sure that it's a question that whether Colm would address that question, but I'm just inspired to respond to it by pointing out that President Jacob Zuma is a person who is the president of the country. We are here dealing with people who have experienced reconciliation in their work, in the fields, with real human beings. The examples and the stories that they share with us inspire us to understand what reconciliation actually means in action. So this is not about a Western perspective, it's rather a human perspective. What do human beings do when they need to engage with what our speaker has referred to as doing what must be done? These conversations here are about learning from others. We cannot be parochial about these conversations, especially we cannot only think about inviting politicians, especially when we know that sometimes the politicians are divisive in some ways, in many ways, in fact. So we want to create conversations that are inclusive, conversations that are more invitational than divisive. So I think it's important for the gentleman who asked the question or made his comments that these forums are for us to learn from the world, where people have dealt with real pain, real suffering, real unfinished businesses in their countries similar to ours, so that in the end we leave this room saying that we have learned something today, because that too is possible for us as well. So you are very mistaken in assuming that we are using Western perspectives. We're using human perspectives. I think it's very important to underscore that. So could you please ask your question, the gentleman here?
Evening, Professor. You know, myself and a few friends were very privileged to sit down with a very nice gentleman by the name of Bailey Jackson, who introduced us to this idea we'd never heard of intersectionality when dealing with discrimination and all of those things. And one thing he also mentioned was, you know, you get into a situation where all these theories exist regarding reconciliation and all of these things, but the problem is, in order to access a lot of these, you have to have a certain academic ability or access to certain intellectualism or intellectual debate or, you know, such fora. But now my question is to you, I mean, I had to come to university in order to access a lot of theories. I was in high school or whatever. I basically had to learn how to read before I could access a lot of theories. Now, you and I today might be able to discuss theory, the theories, conscientization, those types of things. My basic question is, how do you make the rhetoric or the discussion around reconciliation accessible to people who don't necessarily have access to education and who aren't necessarily educated? How do we introduce these theories and how do we simplify them enough? Not necessarily use the word simplify because that could have a negative connotation to it, but how do we make it accessible to those who don't necessarily have access to the intellectual resources that we do?
Okay.
Okay.
One last question,
Right.
because I did not check my time. It's 7:20, and we are supposed to be out of here by 7:30. We will have one very last question. Didn't you have your hand, the gentleman here? Where is the mic? We will choose anyone.
It's all been men, hasn't it, Pumla?
I know, I'm
Yeah.
looking to see that isn't, well, not only men,
Oh,
only
big pardon.
black men.
Student president,
So-
obviously, but...
Okay, so there you go. Unfortunately, these things always, you know, the time just flies. And
Yeah, sure.
I did not even look at the time. Yes, please.
No, thank you very much, Prof, and the opportunity that I've been given. My question is a very much simple one, of which I believe so that the professor will help me out in defining it. As a historian, when we teach and when we learn history, we're taught that we were given the definition that reconciliation is bringing two warring factions together, and of which the definition had questions in it as to who were warring and who were not. And now, my question is, on your point of view, do you think that reconciliation has got to do with sharing responsibility, or with one accepting that I have made a mistake and I apologize? Can reconciliation be brought through sharing the responsibility, or yes, just one accepting that they've done a mistake and showing that they are willing to ensure that they are forgiven, or they are willing to act upon their apology? Thanks.
That would be our last question.
Okay, thanks.
Yes,
Well, look, for the first question at the back, for the part of that I can answer, I will say that international connections and engaging with people on issues of reconciliation from other places can only improve your context, even if you totally disagree with how they've approached it, or what they do, or their frameworks, their paradigm, their ideology, whatever that might be, because at least you're thinking about it, shifting your position in relation to something else. So whether or not your theories and processes of reconciliations are borrowed from an imperialistic or colonialist paradigm, you don't have to agree with them. You just have to acknowledge which parts of those you want to use and take forward, which are not appropriate for you, for your context, and do your own thing. But the important thing is to move forwards in reconciliation. Sometimes reconciliation can only be created when there is friction, and friction creating momentum. And Chris's question, I think things like the arts, creativity, creative processes, and creative engagement are wonderful ways in which people can see, understand, and comprehend things for perhaps the first time. And I gave an example in the speech there about forum theatre, a very simple device that's used in restorative justice situations across the world, where people, who may be in areas of multiple deprivation, are facilitated to engage with a debate and an issue that people in universities are wrestling with through different media, but they're allowed to interact with that, engage with it, and change it, and try and plot ways forward for their own future. I think tools like that can be really powerful, not in isolation, but as part of a process. And I think that's where arts and creativity can really become vital in helping people create the narrative, create the architecture that they need to help them reconcile. Does reconciliation always entail saying sorry? I don't know. I think that's for you to decide. I think it's a personal choice when to reconcile. And I think it's a personal choice when you feel able to say sorry about something. So I don't know the answer to that question. But not to leave it on a negative, one of the most powerful and instructive moments in my life was meeting a guy called William Ury, who's an American academic, Harvard School of Negotiation. He wrote the book Getting to Yes. And I met him with my colleagues, Paul Nolan, Stevie Johnston, and we learned for the first time that there was a way in which you could get past people's positions on things and find out what their interests are. And if you get past people's established positions and think about things from their perspective, then you can understand and comprehend things much, much better, and therefore make your process of reconciliation much, much easier.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Oh, don't go.
Thank you very much. This is we are approaching the end of our program. We are truly grateful to you for bringing not just a perspective, but the experiences of actually getting to the other side and looking into the future and what people do when they engage at that level. You have your own story of having been a student at Queen's University at a very complicated time in your country, and you've shared with us your journey with other students and how you have drawn lessons from simple things like what is the language we use in order to move forward, the expression from your university, neutral working environment that seemed odd and complicated and sort of meaningless at the time, and yet you have conveyed to us that language is very important, finding language to move forward, because sometimes these complicated experiences are inarticulable. You can't explain them, you can't talk about them, they're difficult to talk about. And so when institutions give us language to talk about what we need to do, how to take the steps forward, is very important. It's difficult, but it is truly inspiring to learn from you all the steps and the journeys that we have to take as a university, as a community in a university that also is complicated in terms of issues of the past and how we move forward in the future. I take from your talk the line, "It is time to kiss Achilles' heels." And if there are moments such as those in our speaker's address this evening, let us please take those moments, because it is in words that are action words, performative words, that we can also find a handle in terms of how we can move forward. It's a university, we're complicated, we have a complicated history, but the important thing is we want the best for our institution. And how do we achieve the best for our institution? Is if you can imagine, each one of us imagines the role that we can take in order to move forward, to make our institution better, not only by just passing the grades, but by developing and creating the right sense of ethos so that we can be an example out there in terms of what is possible, what we can do, what we can achieve, and how to do what needs to be done. So thank you very much, Com, for those words. We will forever remember them. So shall we do another clap for him, please?
Thank you very much.
Thank yous for this evening. The first one goes to Professor Jonathan Jansen. Always such an inspiring leader for all of us, because you create an environment where we can have these conversations. In other places, students and faculty alike do not have the space for conversation. It is wonderful that we have the spaces for conversation. It's important that we take advantage of them. We actually have the conversation because the space is here, has been created. So I salute you for being the kind of leader that you are. For us at this institution, for all of us, and for people who are aspiring to be leaders, you have shown us what it is to do the right thing, to know what it needs to be done. You go for it, you grab it, and we like that in a leader who can make decisions and move forward in taking decisions and surround himself with people who can actually move forward. So thank you, Professor Jansen, for your leadership at this university and for spaces such as these ones for us to have the complicated conversations. And while we are thanking Professor Jansen, we also thank our own Lady of Grace, Mrs. Grace Jansen. She's not here tonight, but she is behind the scenes in her welcoming spirit for these kinds of conversations, and we know that she will be welcoming our special guests tonight. So shall we please give a round of applause to our Ladies of Grace. The music team tonight from the Odeon School of Music. Thank you so much for such wonderful, beautiful music, especially to your leaders, Professor Nicol and Petrus van Heerden, who is the head of the school, the singers themselves. So thank you very much for always being available to respond affirmatively to our requests to you. The singers themselves, Betha, Menyatso, mezzo soprano, you heard her voice this evening. Malifutsane Mufukeng, the baritone, and we Dumelon Tatiso, soprano. We will invite you back here again for other events, so thank you very much to you. Cesar Stradom is the pianist who was accompanying them, so shall we give him a round of applause as well. Not to hold you too long, ladies and gentlemen, they are going to perform again, just one last item, but before that, I do want to thank the technical team. All you see in front of you, the member of the Roy Stool over there who has the video recording machinery, Ayford, thank you very much, always, for being available. People from the Creative Kilowatts at the back there who are in charge of the sound system. We see them always when we have these major events. Thank you very much to you all. Johan, the photographer, he's right here in the front, so thank you very much. Joan, who manages the process of the formalities for tonight. So Joan Nell, thank you very much. And lastly, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, the communications department under Lascia Loda and the marketing department under Nomonde Badi have been very supportive. You can see all the signage, all the branding, and the chairs and the carpets. These come from these departments. They give an aesthetic look to the whole conversation. So thank you very much to you all. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, Joanne Naidu from our office, she is our office manager. She and I lead the organizing of these events, and we are very privileged. She and I are privileged that Professor Jansen has entrusted these conversations to us to organize. So thank you very much. And without much further ado, I am going to invite the singers to give us the last item. And if you could please remain seated when they finish, and the procession will head out with Mr. Cole McGiven. So come.